Welcome to another episode of Shared Learning. Today we're here with Charlie, Hulks and Lynn Park, and we're here to talk a little bit about student agency in the theory of knowledge classroom. So first of all, thanks for joining us today.
Welcome for having us.
Can you outline the project, the student agency project that we spoke about earlier?
I think the project was intended to see if we were able to find a way of increasing student agency in the International Baccalaureate, the IBDP programme, because people tend to think that the syllabus is so confined and so defined by the IB that it's difficult to allow the students to have that agency. Now, in the theory of knowledge, in TOK, we have a little bit more freedom. And we decided that for one of the optional topics, that was knowledge and politics, we would basically allow the students to run that topic, but in a fairly controlled way. So we set it up with the students choosing which knowledge question they were most interested in. And then we assigned groups based on their choices. And we scaffolded the activity so that the students had an idea of what they needed to do and where they wanted to go with it. They were required to produce a 30-minute interactive lesson to teach to the rest of the group. It had to be interactive, it wasn't just a presentation. And they had 2 weeks to prepare, and then we spent about 2 weeks with those lessons taught by the students, which was fantastic.
So what was it like because you talked about your role as a teacher and how you help to structure those lessons, and then the gradual release to allow students to kind of take some ownership. What was it like as a teacher in those early planning stages?
I think we realised that the planning was extremely important, and we needed to get for it to go the way we hoped it would, although we were by no means certain that it would go that way. We knew that the planning was really important, especially with scaffolding and the approach that we had. So it was really great that we could work as a team collaboratively, because by bouncing ideas off each other and deciding, I think a lot of our approach was what would happen if, preemptive in terms of thinking about presumptive outcomes. We don't want this to happen. We don't want the students to go down this route. How do we avoid it? And then sort of, backwards thinking about what measures do we put in place to avoid that happening. So I think there was a lot of time spent, thoughtful time spent on discussion and planning what we were going to do. So it was very much front-loaded from that aspect. So then we could hand it over to the students, but by no means was the approach that they just got on with it and we sat there as bystanders. We had I think there was quite a lot of puppeteering in the background, that we were focused on making sure that we had that element of control because of the way that we'd set it up and scaffolded it at the start.
So what were you hoping for? I mean, you thought about this project, you knew that you wanted to give some student agency. What were you hoping for in some of these student outcomes?
Well, from a student point of view, we were hoping to see increased engagement, because the students have a tendency, I think all teenagers, well, perhaps all people have a tendency to sort of sit back, listen and then forget. And so by having them more involved, it would mean that they were more engaged in the process, and so hopefully that would improve their learning and the pure enjoyment of it. On a wider scale, we also wanted to share this project with other teachers to allow them perhaps to take that risk to try in their own subject in a small way of giving students more agency. And that's why we want to also share the project with a wider audience, both other IB teachers and anyone else, so that people can see that we felt it did work. Our aim was to increase enjoyment and increase engagement. And when we did the survey afterwards with the students, we saw that was definitely the case. Well over half the students felt that they were much more engaged and that they enjoyed the process very much. So in that way, I think it was very interesting to see the outcome. Difficult to actually find an objective measure of how much their learning had been increased because there's nothing objectively to compare it against. I mean, the students felt that they'd learnt a lot, but we didn't have an objective measure to be able to say that they did.
Yeah, but I think we're certain that the engagement improved quite significantly. I think one of the challenges of the TOK program is it's very challenging and very theoretical, and quite a lot of students don't find it easy. So, you know, the ability to switch off sometimes increases, but definitely by giving them complete ownership of what they were doing, they were so beautifully invested in what they were doing, and they took such pride in what they were doing, and they really did exceed our expectations in terms of the quality of what they produced. You know, I think it's fair to say that we had measures in place of what we were going to do if this approach hadn't worked, and we'd built in time to even prepare for you know, less positive results. But it wasn't needed at all, because they did such an incredible job of and the quality of the material that they produced as well. And I think one of the real pleasures for us as teachers was that we became the learners in the classroom, and we were learning literally at the same time as the students, and we were taught things that we didn't know, and that sometimes their approach to something and the examples they chose were really, really impressive. And I think that was I certainly enjoyed that as an experience immensely.
What was it like sitting in the classroom as a student and watching your students kind of teach you? What was that experience?
I mean, I think it was fantastic. I mean, we sat there and we just sat as students in the classroom. So we were a group of two rather than a part of the larger groups that some of the students were working in. But we really enjoyed the activities that the students were using. They were interactive activities, and we were involved doing the activities in the same way as the students were.
They were challenging activities.
Yeah, and some of them were extremely challenging.
Fun and easy.
What was also so enjoyable was to see how the students behaved as teachers. You could see that they were modelling behaviour that they'd seen their own teachers doing, and that was so interesting to watch. You could almost hear yourself being echoed back in the way that you'd spoken to the class, that they would speak to you in the same way, and the way they came around the different groups, you know, saying, how are you getting on? You know, what do you think of this? How would you like to expand on that? In the same way as we do. The students were very effective teachers for the most part.
Yeah. And I think it certainly built our confidence of doing something like that again, and feeling that we could take that risk, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face, certainly as our GCSE and IB teachers higher up the school. We have, you know, a very at times very content-driven curriculum, and I think we sometimes overly worry about making sure that content is delivered by us, because we, you know, subconsciously think that that's the best approach. But actually trusting the students to do it themselves proved to be incredibly positive. So I think, you know, I would take this certainly if I was teaching an IB English class again, I would most definitely model what we did with our TOK class in a different context. And I'm hopeful that by sharing that experience, it shows other teachers that it really can work. And perhaps we overly worry about the need to be the deliverer of knowledge rather than the facilitator, the supportive presence in the classroom, because so much of our time during the lessons was just spent experiencing the learning alongside the students, and that was wonderful.
You said this word trust, and sort of trusting the students to get, you know, what they needed from the lessons and to really take ownership. What do you think are some ingredients to enable that sort of trust within the classroom, both for teachers and students?
I think one of the things that we saw in the feedback from the students is that they're also concerned about whether or not what they were taught by their peers was as effective as what had been taught by, or would have been taught by, the teachers. And I think part of that trust is not just the trust of the teachers to let go, but trust between the students, and getting that practice of, yes, you can get your information, you can get your learning from other people, that peer learning, I think is something that needs to be built up and give them that confidence. And I think that will take time, and it takes time to build that across not just one class, but across a school environment. And building that trust that learning can happen in different ways and things can be presented in different ways. And you don't have to have the teacher standing in front of the class teaching them in a traditional way. And I think that takes time. And in an international school where there is so much mobility of families, I think also we need to try and get that trust established with the parents as well.
Sure.
That this is effective learning and effective teaching, even though it's not the traditional format that they've seen. And I think we've got a way to go, I think, not just here at ISS, but in the educational community, to educate the teachers, the students, and the parents about what's effective learning.
So maybe, what were some key ingredients? I thought it was really interesting when we spoke earlier. You spoke about having that relationship with each other, and to be able to work with another teacher and collaborate kind of helped you maybe develop that trust also. Can you talk a little bit about maybe that and some of the other ingredients for doing this in a successful way?
I think bouncing ideas off each other and about how do we approach this, because it's, you know, two minds aren't alike, as the saying goes, and I think sometimes we work well as a team and we come to things from different perspectives, but also sometimes it's just that security of someone agreeing with an idea and saying, yeah, let's give this a try, this will work, that second bit of confidence that's there, because so much of teaching, sometimes particularly in high school when you're the only person who's a specialist in your subject, can lead to a lot of dependence on yourself, and having that support mechanism in place, I think was really, really important for me to go, yeah, okay, we can do this, or what do you think of this idea? So on the one hand, some constructive criticism and an idea is just as valuable, but in other times having some support of the idea was really good, or just the idea of thinking about it from a different perspective. That for me was the most valuable part of it, and I don't think what we produced would have been as good if we'd worked independently. I certainly feel that.
No, absolutely, and I think I'm a great fan of team teaching in a way that allows people to not be so isolated. I think it can be a very isolating job, teaching. And as you say, particularly in a high school situation where you might be the only person teaching that course, it's not an easy job from that point of view. In many other jobs, you work automatically in a team. And I think that team approach, where it's possible, is very important, and it can be cross-curricular as well. It doesn't have to be just people who are working within your own subject area, even not just working on the same course, but having that chance to try things out and to talk with a group of people who you do trust. Yeah, trust is important. And just try ideas out and say, do you think this would work, and how about this?
And the cross-curricular thing was quite interesting, because some of the approaches that we took to the scaffolding were things that I perhaps used in literature circles, for example, in previous and English classes, and the principle and the idea of students taking control, probably in a smaller framework, a smaller activity in a smaller period of time. We just developed that into a larger context, but then it just shows that so much of this is skill-based rather than content and subject-based. And it reinforces this idea that you can very much work with teachers from other curriculum areas, because the ideas that we're trying to develop and the techniques that we want to use in our classroom transcend subjects on all levels. And I think that was certainly a very valuable reminder through the experience.
When we spoke earlier, you mentioned something similar, and it struck me, yeah, of course. So planning for these kinds of projects, it's not reliant on having, sharing a particular discipline or subject, and that's such an interesting way of utilizing each other's expertise. So Maybe, could you give maybe one piece of advice for teachers who are keen on following your footsteps?
Just do it, as the saying goes. Yeah, be a risk taker. It can be something quite small.
Yeah.
You're not throwing away your whole curriculum. Do it in a small, controlled way. Scaffold the activity. Don't think it's a case of going in and saying, you know, hey, you can do this. Make sure you think it through first. But just, you know, take the risk and try it out in a small way. Be willing to put yourself out there and take a risk.
I think for me the two biggest takeaways was one, that you don't need to spend months and months on something for it to be incredibly valuable and to have an impact on what you do in the future, because this certainly has for in the context of what we were exploring. In terms of time, it actually didn't. As you said, it was a small project, but immensely valuable. And I think that's really important to remember, because I think sometimes we have this misconception that for an action research project to be valuable, it has to be months and months and months of time, and I don't think that's true at all. So I think that was very much a valuable thing to share with our colleagues, because we do get very busy. We have a lot of we have heavy workloads to balance and so forth, and sometimes there's perhaps a misconception, I don't have time to do something like this, but actually it fitted very nicely into the structure of having a really positive experience for the students, but had a very strong impact on how we will approach things in the future. So I think that's the main thing for me.
Great. Lynn, Charlie, thank you so much for your time. That's great.
Thank you.